Every employee at Le Chateau d'Or whispered the same silent prayer on Tuesday nights.
You call
Please,
this a
not table
steak?
8.
This is an
That
insult.
table belonged to one man whose very presence could drain the warmth out of the busiest dining room. His name was Richard Caldwell, a billionaire whose empire was built on shipping networks and ruthless precision. To the public, he was celebrated in glossy magazines for discipline and business genius. But to the staff of Le Chateau d'Or, he was the guest no one wanted. When his sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up outside, the atmosphere inside shifted instantly. The hum of conversation dimmed. Laughter vanished midair. Even the sound of cutlery softened as though the restaurant itself was afraid of him. It was tradition among the staff to murmur warnings like a chant. Don't meet his eyes. Don't speak unless asked. Don't contradict him. Anyone who broke those rules never lasted. Some were fired, others mysteriously resigned, and a few simply disappeared from the schedule. Le Chateau d'Or wasn't just a restaurant, it was theater. The chandeliers cast golden light across crisp white tablecloths, where politicians, tycoons, and social elites played their endless games of power. Behind the curtain, the staff moved like shadows, polished, silent, precise. But Tuesday nights broke the pattern. Those nights belonged only to Richard Caldwell, and everyone became a reluctant actor in his play. For 2 weeks, Naomi Harris had been training in this world. At 24, she was sharp and eager, with bills stacked high at home, a mother suffering from chronic illness, a younger brother in school, and an apartment one paycheck away from collapse. This job wasn't a dream, it was survival. She had memorized the complicated wine list, mastered the 7 different forks, and learned how to carry trays like they weighed nothing. But there were other lessons too. Tie your hair back because curls weren't professional. Lower your tone because confidence sounded like defiance. Even the way security eyed her skin when she walked in reminded her she was always being tested. That night, when Richard Caldwell's arrival was announced, panic rippled through the staff. Veterans quickly invented reasons to vanish into the cellar. New workers polished silver that was already gleaming, praying not to be chosen. A mock lottery was held with slips of paper behind the bar. When the shortest slip landed in Naomi's hand, the room seemed to freeze. She straightened her apron, steadied her breath, and walked toward her fate. The floor manager, Mr. Jennings, leaned close and whispered, "Table 8. Richard Caldwell. Be quick, polite, and visible. Don't get clever. And don't meet his eyes." The advice carried more fear than kindness. Naomi only nodded. She had grown used to justifying her place in every room she entered. Tonight she wasn't going to crumble. The dining hall stretched long and heavy as she approached table 8. Candles glowed against the glass wall, where the city sparkled below. Richard Caldwell sat alone, a glass of scotch at his side. He didn't look up when Naomi reached him. "Good evening, sir," she said evenly, balancing warmth with professionalism. "It's our honor to serve you tonight." When he finally turned his head, his steel-gray eyes swept her name tag, then her apron in a slow scan. No hint of kindness, no hunger, just cold evaluation. He didn't speak right away. The silence stretched so long that someone at the bar dropped a spoon, the clang ringing like a gunshot. "You're new," Richard finally said, not as a question but a statement. "Yes, sir." "Second week," Naomi replied. "They let rookies handle my table now. Standards here must be slipping." The words landed sharp, but Naomi didn't flinch. She thought of her mother's medical bills and forced a small, polite smile. "The only standard that might slip tonight, sir, is the butter if you order it." The air tightened. A server at a nearby table froze mid-step. From across the room, one of Naomi's co-workers frowned, fearful that she had gone too far. But Richard's expression remained unreadable, except for the faintest flicker in his eyes, like someone hearing an unexpected note. "Filet mignon. Medium rare but closer to rare. The center is pink, it goes back. Separate sauce. Don't pour. Don't touch. And bring a bottle of Petrus. 1982. He hadn't even opened the menu. Naomi wrote every detail with a steady hand. "Yes, sir." "Right away." As she turned back toward the kitchen, her co-workers whispered behind her. "Too bold," one muttered. "She won't last." But Naomi kept walking, her chin high. Inside the kitchen, Chef Antonio Vega read the order and scoffed. Rare but not pink? What does he want me to do? Cook it with my stare. Naomi repeated the instructions exactly as given. No edits. No mistakes. When she added the request for Petrus 1982, the sommelier Marco nearly tripped rushing to the cellar. That wine was sacred. The kitchen flared with motion. Butter sizzled, garlic cracked, thyme smoked in the pan. Naomi stayed near, watching every detail though she never touched a pan. She knew the truth, this wasn't just dinner, it was a test. And she was the target. By the time Marco returned, cradling the Petrus bottle like a newborn, Naomi had tightened her apron strings and braced herself. She carried the tray out as though every step was part of a performance. At table 8, she presented the wine with calm hands. Richard studied the label, gave the smallest nod, and watched her every move as she cut the foil, wiped the neck, and drew the cork with practiced patience. She poured a taste and stepped back. He swirled, sipped, and held the wine in his mouth so long the ticking of the clock became unbearable. Finally he set the glass down. Acceptable. At Le Chateau d'Or, that one word meant she had passed, for now. Naomi delivered the filet mignon with flawless precision, the sauce boat placed exactly where instructed. Richard cut into the meat, checked the center, and ate in silence. He neither praised nor scolded, but the fact that he continued eating meant she had survived round 1. The rest of the evening unfolded on thin ice. Every detail mattered, how she refilled water, how she placed coffee, even the silence she maintained. By the end, Richard signed the bill with his black card, scrawled his name like a blade across the page, and left without a word. Only when the glass door rotated closed did Naomi open the folder. Inside was a tip so large it felt unreal. Nearly half the bill, plus 2 words written in sharp strokes, for the trouble. The staff gasped when they saw it. Whispers filled the room. No one had ever received such generosity from him. For years he had been a nightmare. And tonight he had rewarded the one person who dared not to break. In the break room, Mr. Jennings warned her softly, "Be careful. That man has power no one should underestimate. One call from him can ruin a life." Naomi nodded, but her eyes carried something unshakable. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't broken a rule. She had simply refused to erase herself. That night, she divided the money at her kitchen table. Medicine for her mother, tuition for her brother, and a little for emergencies. The red numbers on her bills shrank, but the weight on her chest didn't lift. Because in her mind, one question lingered like smoke. What does Richard Caldwell really want from me? The following Tuesday evening, the ritual returned. As the staff at Le Chateau d'Or prepared for the night, tension thickened in the air. Everyone knew what it meant when the black Rolls-Royce rolled to the curb outside. Richard Caldwell had returned, and with him came the dread of table 8. But this time there was something different. Word spread like a spark down the hall. He had specifically requested Naomi Harris. The news stunned the staff. Veterans exchanged uneasy looks, while new hires whispered behind polished menus. Mr. Jennings, the manager, pulled Naomi aside. His tone was firm, but his eyes revealed unease. He asked for you by name. That's not usual. Listen carefully, tonight you must not step out of line. No clever remarks. No testing boundaries. Just serve him and walk away unharmed. Naomi nodded, but a thought pulsed in her mind. If Richard Caldwell, the man who terrified everyone, had asked for her, then she had already stepped into his game. And games like his always came with stakes. At precisely 7:30 p.m., his car slid up to the entrance like a shadow arriving early for its cue. Inside, the dining room fell into its hush. Conversations slowed, clinks softened, and once again the spotlight, silent but heavy, landed on table 8. When Naomi approached, she noticed at once what was different. No glass of scotch sat on the table tonight. Instead, there was only a sealed bottle of water beside a tumbler of ice cubes stacked carefully. He looked up the moment she stopped, his gray eyes cutting across her name tag as if reminding her he knew exactly who she was. "Harris," he said, her name falling like an order. "Good evening, sir," she answered, calm and steady. "Starter. Pan-seared scallops." Exactly 60 seconds per side. Time it if you have to. Spinach on the plate but not touching the scallops. I want space between them. 3 slices of lemon, not 2, not 4. Water opened in front of me. Ice poured separately. I'll mix it myself. Naomi wrote every detail in clean lines. For the main course, duck confit. But your chef's cherry sauce is sugar heavy. Tell him to make an orange and star anise reduction instead. If I taste sweetness beyond a trace, it goes back. Her pen lifted. She looked up, meeting his gaze briefly. Yes, sir. I have everything. Do you? He asked sharply, as though daring her to falter. Every word, Naomi replied. Richard Caldwell leaned back, folding his hands. His silence was permission. Naomi turned toward the kitchen. On her way, another guest tossed a coat check stub into her hand, calling her sweetheart. Naomi paused, pointed to her name tag and said firmly, I served table 8, sir. Coat check is right there. She handed the ticket back, polite but final. The man chuckled, awkwardly embarrassed. Naomi walked on. She had long since learned to fight such small battles without raising her voice. Inside the kitchen, Chef Antonio read the order aloud and frowned. Orange and star anise reduction? What is he trying to turn us into, a cocktail bar? Marco rolled his eyes. We're customizing sauces for him now? Next, he'll ask us to bottle his moods. Naomi stood her ground. Chef, tonight isn't about his whims, it's about precision. If he says he wants perfection, then I need it flawless. Not to please him. To leave him no excuse. Antonio studied her for a long moment, his irritation giving way to respect. Fine. We'll do it. But if he hates it, it's on his shoulders. The kitchen became a laboratory. Naomi borrowed a stopwatch from the bar and stationed herself beside the seafood station. 1 minute, she whispered, eyes on the scallops. Flip. 1 minute. The golden crust formed with exactness, like a clock striking on cue. The spinach wilted until emerald green but not soggy, and the 3 lemon slices were cut identical, edges clean, placed on their own plate. The water bottle was set aside to be opened in front of him, and the ice cubes were swapped for large ones, melting slower than the small shards. At the sauce station, Antonio muttered as he stirred. Fresh orange juice reduced slowly with strips of zest, star anise cracked, a dot of salt, not sugar, pulled the flavor sharp. He plated with unusual restraint, careful geometry between scallops and spinach, porcelain as blank space between them. Naomi lifted the tray and inhaled deeply before heading back out. At table 8, she opened the water with a quiet hiss, placed the lemon and ice in precise formation and stepped back. She set down the scallops with deliberate calm. Richard raised his fork, flipped a scallop, examined the sear, then sampled the spinach first, testing whether the boundary between them was intact. Only then did he take a bite of scallop. He chewed slowly, throat still. The silence dragged, each second longer than the last. Finally he placed his fork down. No scowl. No complaint. The scallops passed. The duck confit followed, presented with the orange star anise sauce in a separate silver boat. Richard tipped the edge, letting a single drop fall, and touched it with his fork like a scientist running an experiment. He closed his eyes for one long breath. Good, he said. One word. But at table 8, it carried more weight than applause. Naomi didn't exhale, not yet. She stood her post until the plate was cleared, then returned to the kitchen. Antonio met her with a nod, tension easing from his shoulders. Fresh coffee, Richard ordered at the end. Naomi hovered near the barista, watching as the machine was flushed, the filter changed, and the water temperature checked exactly. No excuses for bitterness. She delivered the cup without a tremor in her hands. This time Richard didn't scribble for the trouble on the bill. But when Naomi opened the folder, the tip was even larger than before. Lavish to the point of absurd. The staff gathered in awe. Some whispered that she had tamed a dragon. Others muttered she was a lightning rod, absorbing his wrath so no one else had to. Naomi, however, didn't bask in victory. She felt as though she was being drawn into a storm that alternated between striking and sheltering her. With each tip her family's burdens lightened. Medicine for her mother. tuition covered for her brother. A little more safety in her emergency envelope. But she couldn't shake the hollow inside. What was Richard Caldwell really playing at? Weeks rolled by and Richard Caldwell kept returning every Tuesday like clockwork. For everyone else on staff, his visits were a nightmare. But for Naomi Harris, they had become something more complicated, a trial, a puzzle, maybe even an unwanted connection. Every week he seemed to sharpen his tests. Replace the water glass the moment it dropped below half. Adjust the dining room lighting by exactly 5%. Move families with children farther away because their chatter was noise. Correct the angle of lamb chops so they faced the same direction. To the rest of the staff, Richard was still a tyrant. To Naomi, he was an endless series of demands, each one a coded message she had to translate into action. She became the still point in a storm, holding the dining room steady. Others noticed too. Veterans began to relax on Tuesdays, knowing Naomi would absorb the brunt of Richard's control. They called her brave. But Naomi didn't feel brave, she felt burdened. It was as though she had become his chosen target, shield, and challenger all at once. On a rainy evening in late autumn, Naomi's phone buzzed during her shift. She glanced quickly, her younger brother, Darius. She slipped into the narrow alcove by the restrooms, pressing the phone to her ear. Naomi, Darius's voice cracked with panic. The doctor says Mom needs a new treatment. It's $40,000. Insurance won't cover it. They say it's experimental. Naomi froze against the wall. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. Don't tell Mom the amount, she whispered. Let her have some hope. I'll handle it. Tears blurred her eyes. She swiped them away, steadying her breath, then stopped cold. 20 steps away, Richard Caldwell stood by the restroom door. His shoulders stiff, his face unreadable. He had heard. Naomi's heart pounded. She could be reprimanded for taking a call during service. Worse, he could use the knowledge as leverage. But Richard didn't move toward her. He turned and walked back to table 8 as though nothing had happened. That night he was quieter than usual. He ate with his usual precision, gave no extra orders, and left without his trademark phrase for the trouble. His tip was still immense, but the absence of words felt louder than anything. Naomi carried it home unsettled. 2 days later, Naomi's phone rang again. The number belonged to a prestigious downtown law firm. She nearly didn't answer, assuming it was a mistake. But when she did, a calm female voice spoke. Miss Harris? This is Catherine Monroe from Monroe and Graves. An anonymous benefactor has retained us to represent your family in a case against the insurance company. All expenses are covered. We'll pursue both an appeal and potential malpractice for delays in diagnosis. Naomi sat stunned on the edge of her bed. Who is paying for this? They insist on staying anonymous, Catherine replied. Their only instruction was, do what's best for your family. Naomi whispered a thank you, though her voice trembled. When the call ended, she laughed, hollow, disbelieving. She knew the universe didn't hand out miracles at random. This wasn't luck. This had a name, even if it went unsaid, Richard Caldwell. The next week, Naomi walked into work carrying a secret she hadn't shared with anyone. Catherine had explained everything, the strategy, the precedents, the appeal template that could cut through the insurer's vague, experimental excuse. For the first time in months, Naomi allowed herself to hope. That Tuesday, table 8 was as daunting as ever. But Richard's orders carried a new rhythm. They were still precise, still controlling, but something in his tone had shifted. He no longer barked to crush. He spoke like a man testing boundaries. When Naomi poured his coffee at the end of the evening, Richard finally spoke in a voice rough but steady. The world's systems are built to grind down the small. Paperwork is confusing on purpose. Rules are obscure on purpose. When someone gives you good advice, not using it would be foolish. He didn't say, I. He didn't claim credit. He phrased it like a riddle, placing distance between himself and the truth. But Naomi understood. The anonymous benefactor was sitting in front of her. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his gray eyes, not control, not coldness, but the faintest hint of recognition. Like a man who had carried silence too long, and accidentally let it slip. That night, Naomi went home and searched online. She found old news articles. His wife and daughter, Elena and Sophia Caldwell, killed by a drunk driver years ago. Charges had been lightened for the driver, protected by wealth and lawyers. Richard Caldwell had walked into court one man and walked out another, harsher, angrier, determined to control anything within reach. He could not control the drunk driver. He could not control death. So he controlled wine temperatures, plate angles, and the staff at Le Chateau d'Or. But outside the restaurant, Naomi now suspected, he was funding battles against the very systems that had failed him. She closed her laptop and sat in silence. For the first time she realized, Richard Caldwell was not just a tyrant. He was a wound walking in a suit. Yet wounds did not excuse wounding others. Naomi held both truths together, understanding his pain, but refusing to erase her own dignity. The next Tuesday when she walked toward table 8, her steps carried more certainty. She knew now that every plate, every glance, every whispered rule was not just about fear. It was about rewriting the script. And she was already part of it. By the time another Tuesday arrived, Naomi felt the weight of anticipation like a stone in her chest. Richard Caldwell's pattern was never random. Every order, every glance, every pause carried purpose. But this week felt different even before his car slid to the curb. Greg, the receptionist, leaned in close to Mr. Jennings. His voice carried across the room in a whisper, "He's reserved table 8 again." And this time, he asked for Naomi Harris by name. The dining room froze for a beat, then resumed its rhythm, though tighter, like strings pulled too taut. A request from Richard Caldwell wasn't just unusual, it was unheard of. Staff avoided his table whenever possible. He had never singled anyone out. Until now. Mr. Jennings pulled Naomi aside, his face lined with worry. "You know what this means?" he murmured. "No banter this time. No clever comebacks. Just follow his orders exactly and keep your head down. Understand?" Naomi nodded but stayed calm. Fear had been her first instinct weeks ago. Now she felt something sharper, resolve. Richard Caldwell had chosen her, and whether it was a challenge, a test, or something else, she would meet it without losing herself. When she reached table 8, he was already there. No scotch. No wine. Just a sealed bottle of sparkling water beside a glass filled with clear ice cubes. His posture was rigid, his gaze sharp. The moment she stopped, his voice cut through the air. "Harris." "Good evening, sir," she answered, steady and warm. He wasted no time. Starter, seared scallops. Exactly 60 seconds on each side. Spinach wilted but not touching the scallops. "I want the separation visible. 3 slices of lemon. Not 2, not 4. 3. She wrote quickly, neat as survey notes. "For the main course, duck confit. Tell your chef not to drown it in sugar. No cherry. Make an orange and star anise reduction. Sour, sharp. If I taste even a hint too much sweetness, it goes back." "Yes, sir," Naomi replied. He narrowed his eyes. "Did you hear me clearly?" "Every word, sir." For a moment, silence pressed between them. Then he gave the faintest nod. Permission granted. As Naomi walked toward the kitchen, another guest, a man in a tailored suit, shoved his coat ticket into her hand. "Hold this for me, sweetheart." Naomi stopped, pointed calmly at her name tag and replied, "I serve table 8, sir. The coat check is just to your right." Her voice was polite but final. The man flushed and stammered something embarrassed. Naomi kept walking, unbothered. She had faced worse. Inside the kitchen, Chef Antonio scanned the order and groaned. "Orange and star anise reduction? What is this, a perfume shop?" Marco the sommelier smirked. At least he didn't ask for cinnamon-dusted moonlight. "We'd have to call a poet." Naomi cut in firmly. "Chef, tonight he's testing us all. If we deliver exactly what he asks, he has no excuse. That's what matters." Antonio studied her for a moment, then grunted. "Fine. But if he sends it back, it's on him." The kitchen burst into motion. Naomi hovered like a conductor without an instrument. She borrowed a stopwatch from the bar and planted herself beside the seafood station. "1 minute," she whispered. "Flip." 1 minute. The scallops turned golden brown, crust perfect, their centers tender. Spinach wilted just enough, still bright green, dry to the touch. 3 lemon slices, identical, precise, placed on their own plate. At the stove, Antonio stirred the sauce, his face tight with concentration. Fresh orange juice reduced into syrupy sharpness. Cracked star anise floated in the pan. No sugar, just a trace of salt to balance the sour. Plating was geometry, 3 scallops aligned, spinach across like a counterweight, porcelain space between them like a line in the sand. Naomi inhaled deeply and lifted the tray. Back at table 8, she opened the water in front of Richard, poured the ice into its own glass, and set the lemon dish in perfect formation. Then she placed the scallops, stepping back with deliberate calm. He lifted one scallop, turned it over, inspected the sear, then tasted the spinach first, as if to test whether she had followed the separation rule. Only then did he eat the scallop. The silence stretched unbearably. Naomi's heartbeat thudded in her ears. Then he placed his fork down. Not a complaint. Not a word of praise. Just silence. But silence here meant approval. The duck confit followed, served with the star anise reduction in its own silver boat. Richard tipped the boat, let one drop fall onto the plate, touched it with his fork and closed his eyes for one long breath. Good, he said finally. One word. But at table 8 it was monumental. Naomi didn't let relief show. She stood her post until the plate was cleared, then returned to the kitchen, where Antonio gave her the smallest nod. He would never admit it, but her discipline impressed him. When dessert orders from other tables slowed, Naomi kept watch as Richard finished his meal. At the end he requested fresh black coffee. She stayed beside the barista, overseeing every step, water temperature precise, filter clean, brew exact. She delivered it without error. Richard sipped, placed the cup down, and asked for the bill. When Naomi opened the folder after he left, her hands trembled. The tip was staggering, more than the cost of the meal. No note this time. Just numbers, precise and deliberate. The staff swarmed her in whispers. Some joked she was taming a storm. Others said she was walking into a trap. Naomi only smiled faintly. She knew better. This wasn't victory, it was another move in his game. Later that night, sitting at her kitchen table, Naomi divided the money again. Rent, medicine, tuition, emergency fund. The math brought temporary relief, but her mind spun with unease. Richard Caldwell wasn't being generous for no reason. He wasn't rewarding her because he liked her. He was testing her, again and again, pushing to see how far she could go without breaking. She closed her notebook, exhaled slowly, and whispered to herself, "This isn't just about table 8 anymore. He's writing a new script. And whether I like it or not, I'm already in it." The rhythm of Tuesdays had become a strange fixture in Naomi's life. For most of the staff at Le Chateau d'Or, the night Richard Caldwell appeared was a shadow on the calendar. For Naomi, it was a storm she had learned to walk into with steady feet. But this Tuesday began differently. When she arrived, Mr. Jennings was waiting at the door, his lips tight, his clipboard pressed against his chest like armor. "Naomi," he said quietly, pulling her aside, "tonight isn't business as usual. Mr. Caldwell has reserved the private dining room upstairs. He's requested you alone. No assistants, no backup servers. Just you." The words landed like a weight. The private dining room was rarely used, reserved for dignitaries or board meetings. Service there was isolating. No quick rescue from fellow staff. No easy escape. Just one-on-one. Naomi felt her pulse quicken, but she nodded. Fear had become familiar. She had learned to move through it. Upstairs, the room was silent except for the rain pattering against wide windows. A long mahogany table stretched across the space, set for one. Richard Caldwell sat at the head, his hands folded neatly. "Sit," he said. Naomi hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair opposite him. She wasn't here as a guest, but he had ordered her into the seat. She braced herself for whatever test this was. "Tell me," Richard said after a long pause, "why do you stay?" The question caught her off guard. "Stay, sir?" "Yes. Most people who encounter me once pray never to do so again. Yet you come back every week. You don't just survive, you perform. Why? Naomi took a breath, choosing her words carefully. Because I have no choice, sir. My family depends on this job. Bill's school medicine. Walking away isn't an option. He studied her face, his eyes sharp but unreadable. So survival drives you. Naomi met his gaze evenly. Yes, but not just survival. Dignity too. I won't let anyone, no matter how powerful, make me feel invisible. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not mockery, something quieter. The silence stretched until he finally said, "Dinner?" She rose quickly, relieved to be back in motion. The meal was delivered by runners from the main kitchen, but Naomi was the only one allowed to enter the room. She presented each course under his watchful eye. Tonight's menu had been crafted with his usual precision. Tuna tartare cut into identical cubes, roasted lamb shank stripped of excess fat, sauce on the side. He ate in silence, his knife movements as exact as the ticking of a clock. Naomi poured his wine, cleared his plates, and stood by like an anchor against the quiet. Halfway through the meal, he broke the silence again. Your brother. What's his name? Naomi stiffened. He had overheard her phone call weeks ago. She hadn't given him details, but clearly he had remembered. Darius, she said cautiously. He's in school? Yes, sir. Studying computer engineering. Richard nodded slightly, then returned to his plate. No further questions. But Naomi's chest tightened. He didn't ask idly. He never did. When dessert arrived, dark chocolate soufflé with espresso ice cream, he pushed the plate forward. Eat. Naomi blinked. Sir? You haven't eaten all night. Sit. Taste it. Tell me if the chef is slipping. It wasn't a request. It was an order. She hesitated, then picked up a spoon and took a careful bite. The soufflé was rich, the ice cream sharp, a perfect balance. She set the spoon down. It's flawless. Richard's mouth curved, not a smile but something close. He leaned back as though satisfied. At the end of the night, when he rose to leave, Naomi placed the bill on the table as usual. Richard slid his black card across, signed with his sharp scrawl, and pushed the folder back. Inside, the tip was staggering again, but this time there was something else. A single folded note. Naomi slipped it into her apron and waited until she was alone to unfold it. The handwriting was precise, slanted, controlled. Do not mistake control for cruelty. Sometimes it is the only shield left. She read the words again and again, her chest tightening. He had revealed nothing, yet everything. That night, at her kitchen table, she divided the money as usual: medicine, tuition, rent. But the note stayed in her pocket, its weight heavier than the bills it had paid. For the first time, Naomi wondered if Richard Caldwell's Tuesday ritual wasn't just about power or precision. Maybe it was also about searching for something or someone who would not flinch in his storm. Naomi had thought she understood the rhythm of Richard Caldwell's Tuesdays by now. The sharp orders, the impossible demands, the silent tests she had learned to meet with steady hands. But this week the rhythm broke. When she arrived at Le Chateau door, Mr. Jennings intercepted her before she could even tie her apron. He's already here, Jennings whispered, anxiety tightening his features. Table 8. He came early. And Naomi, he didn't order food. He asked to speak with you first. Naomi's chest tightened. Richard Caldwell breaking his routine was never a small thing. If he had shifted the pattern, it was deliberate. She smoothed her uniform, calmed her breath, and walked across the dining hall toward the man who seemed to shape silence itself. Richard sat at table 8, no menu in front of him, no glass of water. Just his folded hands resting on the table. The chandeliers caught faint streaks of silver in his hair, making him look less like a businessman and more like a statue carved from steel. Harris, he said, acknowledging her. Good evening, sir, she replied evenly. Sit. The order carried no room for refusal. Naomi pulled out the chair across from him and sat, hands folded in her lap, mirroring his composure. For a long moment he said nothing. The dining room buzzed faintly around them, but at table 8, silence stretched heavy. Then finally he spoke. "You think I enjoy this?" Naomi blinked. The statement felt less like a confession and more like an accusation. She waited, letting him continue. "You think I come here to torment the staff, to measure angles on plates because it amuses me? That's what they whisper, isn't it?" Naomi hesitated, then nodded once. Honesty had always been her only defense with him. "Yes, that's what they say." Richard's jaw tightened. "I don't come here for pleasure. I come here because control is the only thing that keeps the chaos out. If I can dictate the plate, the glass, the service, then for one evening the world does what I tell it to." His eyes bored into hers, daring her to flinch. But Naomi didn't look away. "Control doesn't erase pain, sir. It only hides it for a while." For the first time his expression cracked, the faintest flicker of surprise. Then it was gone, his mask sliding back into place. "Perhaps," he said softly. The waiter in Naomi wanted to steer the moment back to normalcy, to return to menus and orders. But the woman in her, the daughter, the sister, the caregiver, recognized something raw beneath his words. She leaned forward slightly. "You lost something you couldn't control," she said carefully. "And now you punish anyone who reminds you of it." His gaze sharpened, but he didn't deny it. Instead he leaned back in his chair, the muscles in his jaw working like gears. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was heavy with unspoken truths. Finally he lifted a hand and Naomi rose automatically, slipping back into her role. Orders returned, dishes as precise as ever. Wagyu steak seared exactly 3 minutes per side. Vegetables arranged by color gradient. Coffee brewed at 92 degrees. But the tone of the evening was different. Richard didn't bark. He instructed. His words carried weight but not venom. Naomi followed each step, precise and calm, sensing the invisible thread between them had shifted. When dessert came he did not eat. Instead he slid the plate toward her again. "Taste." Naomi hesitated, then obeyed. The custard was smooth, the caramel brittle sharp. She set her spoon down. Perfect balance. Richard studied her face as though the answer mattered more than the food. Then he nodded once, a signal of closure. At the end of the night, Naomi collected the bill folder. Inside was the usual lavish tip, but again a folded note rested on top. This time the message was shorter. "Dignity is rare. Hold on to it." Naomi pressed the paper between her fingers, her throat tightening. He was testing her still, but not just her service. He was testing her endurance, her will, her refusal to be broken. Later that night, back in her apartment, she placed the note in a small wooden box she kept on her dresser. It already held the previous one. She stared at them both, wondering why she hadn't thrown them away. Maybe because, in some strange way, they proved she was more than invisible to him. She closed the box and sat in the dim light of her kitchen. Bills spread out again, rent due in days. The tips covered the costs, but the unease grew. Richard Caldwell wasn't just her most demanding customer anymore. He was weaving himself into her life, note by note, Tuesday by Tuesday. And Naomi couldn't decide if that was a gift or a trap. The following Tuesday began with an air of unease that seemed to infect the entire restaurant. Rain lashed against the tall windows, thunder rolled low over the city, and the staff at Le Chateau d'Or whispered more than they worked. Naomi could feel it in the air. Richard Caldwell's presence loomed heavier than usual, like a storm swelling before it breaks. She tightened her apron, smoothing the fabric with calm hands. By now she had learned that fear served no purpose. Her place was clear, her role unshakable. Still, when Mr. Jennings approached, his voice was more cautious than usual. "He asked for you again," he said quietly. "And Naomi, be careful tonight. Something feels different." Naomi gave a small nod. Different or not, she had no choice but to face it. Richard sat at table 8 as always. But this time he wasn't alone. A man in his 40s, clean-cut, polished in a navy suit, sat across from him. The stranger's posture was perfect, his smile thin, his eyes darting to Naomi as she approached. "Harris," Richard said simply, acknowledging her. "Good evening, sir," she replied, glancing politely at the guest. "This is Mr. Langford," Richard said, his tone sharp. You will serve us both tonight. Yes, sir. Naomi kept her voice steady. Orders were rattled off quickly: pâté, grilled sea bass, a rare bottle of Bordeaux. But it wasn't the food that mattered tonight. It was the tension between the two men. Naomi could feel it in the air, sharp as broken glass. Langford leaned back in his chair, smirking as Naomi poured the wine. She's good, he remarked casually, as though Naomi weren't standing there. No wonder you keep requesting her. Efficient. Quiet. Naomi kept her eyes on the bottle, her movements precise. She had learned long ago that responding to such comments only gave them power. Richard's gaze flicked to Langford, cold as ice. She's competent. That's all that matters. Langford chuckled, sipping his wine. Competent and bold. You don't usually tolerate boldness, Richard. The use of his first name made the air heavier. Naomi pretended not to notice, stepping back once the glasses were poured. But inside, she sensed she was no longer serving dinner. She was serving witness to a battle neither man wanted spoken aloud. Through the courses, Richard remained controlled, his words clipped. Langford, on the other hand, grew looser with each sip of wine, his tone edging toward provocation. He made small jabs about Richard's business empire, about contracts and deals, always with a smile that never reached his eyes. At one point, Langford tapped his fork against his plate. You know, Richard, you can't control everything forever. People break ranks. Systems collapse. Even the most loyal slip away. Naomi froze in place, standing with a tray in her hands. The words weren't about her, but they echoed too close to Richard's rituals. Richard set his knife down with deliberate calm. And some men mistake recklessness for freedom. Until it ruins them. The silence that followed was heavy, tense. Langford smirked, but the edge in his expression betrayed him. Naomi cleared the plates swiftly, grateful for the excuse to move. In the kitchen, Antonio raised an eyebrow. What's happening out there? Two men measuring shadows, Naomi murmured before hurrying back out. Dessert arrived, simple citrus tarts. But Richard didn't touch his. Instead, he turned his gaze on Naomi. Taste it. She obeyed without hesitation, cutting a small bite and nodding. Balanced. Not too sweet. Richard leaned back, satisfied with her response, though Naomi sensed the command hadn't been about the tart at all. It had been a reminder, to her, to Langford, that he dictated the script even here. At the end of the meal, Richard signed the bill as usual. When Naomi opened the folder after they left, her heart lurched. The tip was massive again, but this time, folded inside was not a note. It was a business card. On the back, written in precise handwriting, Tuesday. Private room. Alone. Naomi tucked the card into her apron, her hands trembling slightly. He was pulling her deeper into his world, and she couldn't decide if it was trust, manipulation, or both. That night at home, she placed the card in her wooden box beside the notes. Darius's textbooks sat open on the table, her mother's medicine bottles lined neatly by the sink. The money from Richard paid for all of it. Yet Naomi stared at the box, wondering what price she was really paying in return. The following Tuesday came with a weight Naomi couldn't shake. All week she had stared at the business card Richard Caldwell had slipped her, the words etched on the back like a command she couldn't ignore. Tuesday. Private room. Alone. She told no one, not Jennings, not Antonio, not even Darius. Some secrets had to stay locked away if only to keep others safe. When she arrived at Le Chateau door, Jennings pulled her aside immediately. He's here already. Upstairs. The private room. His voice dropped lower. Naomi, this is unusual. If anything feels wrong, leave. Do you understand? She nodded, though her chest was tight. She knew Jennings meant well, but walking away wasn't an option. Not anymore. The private dining room was dimly lit, shadows pooling across the polished wood. Richard sat at the head of the table again, but this time there was no menu, no wineglass, no folded hands of ritual. Instead, a single folder rested in front of him, closed and heavy. Harris, he said as she entered. Good evening, sir, she replied, steady. Sit. She obeyed, sliding into the chair across from him. For a long time he said nothing. The air felt heavier than usual, the storm of his silence pressing down. Then finally he pushed the folder toward her. Naomi hesitated, then opened it. Inside were papers, legal documents, contracts, case notes. Her eyes widened when she saw her mother's name on one of the pages, the law firm letterhead crisp at the top. Her throat tightened. This is about her treatment. Richard's voice was flat. The insurance company will stall until she is too weak to fight. They count on exhaustion. This, he tapped the folder, is leverage they won't expect. It will break their delay. Naomi's eyes burned. Why are you doing this for me? His gaze was sharp, unreadable. Because no one ever did it for me. The word struck her like a blow. She thought again of the old news articles she had read, the tragedy he carried like armor. His wife and daughter, lost to a system that had protected the guilty instead of the innocent. Naomi swallowed hard. You don't have to carry my fight. Richard's voice dropped, lower, harder. Yes, I do. The silence after those words was heavier than thunder. Naomi didn't know what to say. She closed the folder slowly, her hands trembling. The meal that night was subdued. He ordered little, just a simple soup, bread, black coffee. No wine, no extravagant dishes. Naomi served quietly, every movement deliberate, every second stretched by the tension that filled the room. Halfway through the evening he spoke again. The world respects power, Harris. Money. Influence. But dignity? That's the one thing they can't buy or silence. You've refused to give yours up. That's why you're still here. Naomi looked up, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. I don't stay for your approval. I stay because my family needs me. Richard gave a faint nod as though he expected the answer. But in his eyes there was something else, something that looked almost like recognition. When the evening ended, Naomi gathered the bill folder as usual. Inside was another staggering tip, enough to erase weeks of fear about money. But instead of a note, there was an envelope. Back in her apartment later that night, Naomi sat at the kitchen table under the dim light and opened it carefully. Inside was a single check, written to cover the exact amount of her mother's treatment. Her breath caught. It wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was everything. She stared at the check for a long time, torn between relief and unease. She knew what it meant. Richard Caldwell had crossed the line from customer to benefactor. His storm was no longer just inside the restaurant. It was inside her life. She placed the check carefully in the wooden box beside the notes and the card. Darius's laughter from the other room reminded her why she couldn't refuse it. But as she closed the lid, her heart pounded with a question she could not answer. Was Richard Caldwell saving her family, or binding her to his shadow forever? Naomi woke the next morning with the envelope still on her dresser. She had barely slept, her thoughts twisting all night between gratitude and dread. The check Richard Caldwell had given her was more than money, it was a lifeline. But lifelines always came with knots, and she couldn't ignore the feeling that every Tuesday bound her tighter to his world. At Le Chateau d'Or, the staff had begun to notice. Whispers floated behind her back now. Some said she was lucky. Others said she was reckless. A few claimed she had made a secret deal with Caldwell, though none dared ask her outright. Naomi ignored them, but the weight of their stares pressed on her shoulders. That evening the Rolls-Royce appeared again. The dining hall fell into its hush as Richard walked in, his presence slicing through the air. This time he did not go to table 8. Instead he headed directly to the staircase leading to the private dining room. Jennings approached Naomi quickly. He didn't book the main floor. He wants you upstairs again. His voice carried unease. Naomi, this is no longer just service. Be cautious. Naomi nodded, but inside she already knew. The balance between server and customer had shifted. Richard was drawing her into his orbit step by step. Upstairs, he sat at the head of the long table as before. Tonight, however, there were files stacked neatly beside his plate, along with a sleek tablet. It looked less like a meal and more like a boardroom. Harris, he greeted her, his tone clipped. Good evening, sir. Sit. She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. The moment she sat, he pushed the tablet toward her. On the screen were charts, spreadsheets, contracts. Naomi blinked, confused. I need your eyes. Richard said. Numbers don't lie, but people do. Read this. Tell me what you see. Naomi hesitated. Sir, I'm not an accountant. Good, he replied sharply. That means you won't overthink. You'll see what's there, not what you're told to see. She leaned closer, scanning the screen. It was a contract proposal filled with dense language. But even without training, something stood out. A clause tucked deep in the text, shifting ownership shares. Her brows furrowed. This section, it changes who controls the deal. It looks small, but it gives them power over the outcome. Richard's lips curved faintly, not a smile but an acknowledgement. Exactly. Most would miss it. That's why I asked you. Naomi sat back unsettled. Why me? I'm not part of your world. His eyes fixed on hers. You notice what others ignore. That makes you useful. The word stung. Useful. Not valuable, not trusted. Useful. Still she said nothing. Dinner arrived, delivered quietly by staff Naomi barely recognized. Richard ordered sparingly, salmon with dill, asparagus cut into uniform lengths. Naomi served him as always, her movements precise, but tonight she felt more like a participant in his business than a server in his restaurant. Halfway through the meal he spoke again. Do you know why people fear me, Harris? Naomi looked at him carefully. Because you don't bend. Richard's gaze sharpened. Because I don't forgive mistakes. In my world, mistakes cost lives, fortunes, legacies. Weakness invites wolves. Naomi steadied her voice. And in my world, mistakes are human. They happen. We endure them because we have no choice. For a moment, silence pressed between them. Then, to her surprise, he gave a slight nod. Perhaps that's why you're still here. After dessert, creme brulee with a perfect crackle. He signed the bill as usual. When Naomi opened the folder after he left, she found another note inside, written in his sharp, precise hand. The world will take from you until nothing remains. Learn to see before they strike. Naomi folded the note slowly, her heart heavy. She added it to the wooden box when she got home, placing it beside the others. The check was still there too, untouched, waiting for her mother's treatment bill to arrive. That night, as rain tapped against her window, Naomi whispered to herself. He's not just testing me anymore. He's teaching me. But for what? The next Tuesday carried a different kind of tension. By now, Naomi had grown used to Richard Caldwell's rituals. The private room, the notes, the unexpected questions that felt more like examinations than conversations. But tonight, there was an electricity in the air, sharper than usual, as if something unseen was building toward a breaking point. When she arrived, Mr. Jennings caught her at the entrance. His voice was low but urgent. Naomi, I don't know what's happening, but Caldwell didn't just reserve the room upstairs. He booked the entire floor. No one else is allowed up there. He asked for you, only you. Naomi felt the words sink in. An entire floor cleared out for one dinner. This was no longer about meals or service. This was about power, privacy, and whatever storm Richard Caldwell was preparing to unleash. She climbed the stairs slowly, her breath steady. The private floor was silent, the usual hum of voices gone. When she entered the room, Richard was already there. The table wasn't set for a meal. Instead, documents and folders covered its surface, arranged with military precision. Harris, he said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to echo in the empty room. Good evening, sir, she replied carefully. Sit. She did. Her eyes flicked to the folders, contracts, legal filings, reports. Some bore the insignia of government offices, others the logos of rival corporations. Richard studied her for a long moment. You've learned to read people, haven't you? To see through silence, to hear what's hidden. Naomi kept her voice steady. I try to listen, sir. People tell you more than they realize if you pay attention. His mouth curved faintly, though not in a smile. Good. Tonight I need that. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, faces Naomi didn't recognize, men and women in suits, shaking hands at conferences, cutting ribbons at ceremonies. Attached were articles, press releases, financial charts. Look at them, Richard said. Tell me what you see. Naomi scanned the pages. She saw polished smiles, expensive watches, carefully crafted headlines. But beneath it all, she noticed patterns. Articles that spoke of generosity while financial charts told another story. Deals that were presented as partnerships but quietly funneled power in one direction. They looked generous in public, Naomi said slowly, but in private they're stripping people of choices. Every agreement they sign gives them more control, and no one notices until it's too late. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, approval flickering in his gaze. Exactly. He leaned back, his voice quieter now. The world celebrates wolves in silk suits. They smile while they devour. And the rest are too busy surviving to fight back. Naomi's chest tightened. So what do you want me to do? Nothing, he said sharply. Not yet. For now you observe. You learn. You don't let their smiles fool you. The meal that night was almost an afterthought. Simple roasted chicken, potatoes, and a bottle of water. Naomi served quietly, her mind still turning over the images and words she had read. Halfway through, Richard spoke again, his tone sharper. You think I'm cruel? You think I bark orders for my amusement? Naomi met his gaze. I think you're a man who can't let go of control even when it costs you. For the first time, something like a laugh escaped him, not warm but edged with irony. You're not wrong. He ate in silence after that, the storm of his thoughts hidden behind his steady movements. Naomi stood by, every nerve alert, sensing she was being drawn further into a world she had never asked to enter. At the end of the night, he signed the bill as always. Inside the folder was not money this time, but another note. Control is a shield. But even shields crack. Remember that. Naomi folded it carefully, her heart heavy. She knew he was speaking about himself as much as he was about her. Back at her apartment, she placed the note in the wooden box beside the others. The box was filling now, each slip of paper a thread binding her to him. Darius was in the other room, headphones on, studying late into the night. Her mother slept soundly for once, her new treatment easing the pain. Naomi stared at the notes, her chest tightening with a question that had no answer. Was Richard Caldwell preparing her for something, or preparing her to belong to him? By the time the next Tuesday came, Naomi's nerves were no longer the same as before. Weeks of notes, lavish tips, and private conversations had pulled her far past the boundaries of a server and her customer. She was stepping into a space she couldn't define, half mentor, half tormentor, part rescuer, part trap. At Le Chateau door, whispers followed her everywhere now. When she passed through the kitchen, voices hushed. When she walked into the dining hall, eyes lingered. Everyone had noticed the shift. Some thought she was lucky. Others thought she was reckless. But no one dared to ask her outright what was happening upstairs with Richard Caldwell. That night, the Rolls-Royce arrived earlier than usual. Richard didn't pause to acknowledge the staff. He walked directly upstairs as though the main dining room no longer existed for him. Jennings caught Naomi before she followed. His voice was tight. I've managed this restaurant for years. I've never seen him like this. Whatever's happening, Naomi, remember, you owe him nothing. Nothing. Naomi gave a faint nod, but inside she knew the truth was more complicated. Her family's survival was tied to him now. To pretend otherwise was a lie she couldn't afford. When she entered the private room, Richard was already standing by the window. The city lights glittered below, reflected faintly in the glass. He didn't turn at once. Harris, he said finally, his voice lower than usual. Good evening, sir. Sit. The table tonight was set simply. One plate, one glass, a bottle of wine unopened. No stacks of contracts, no folders, no business disguises. Just the quiet hum of the city beyond the window. Richard poured the wine himself, sliding a glass across the table. Drink. Naomi hesitated. I don't usually. Tonight you will, he cut in. She lifted the glass, taking a small sip. The wine was rich, smooth, the kind she knew cost more than a month's rent. She set it down carefully. For a long moment Richard said nothing. His gray eyes studied her face as though searching for something he couldn't name. Then he spoke. Do you know what it feels like, he said slowly, to lose everything in one night? To watch the world you built ripped apart and to stand there powerless. Naomi's chest tightened. She knew where this was going. She had read the articles, the headlines about the accident that had taken his wife and daughter. But hearing it from him in his own voice was different. I sat in a courtroom, Richard continued, his voice rougher now, and listened to a man's lawyer argue that his life shouldn't be ruined for one mistake. One drink too many. One red light run. And the judge agreed. He walked away with a fine. My wife and daughter didn't walk away at all. Naomi's throat ached, but she stayed silent. He wasn't looking for pity. He was stripping open the wound he had hidden beneath layers of control. Richard's jaw tightened. Since that day I swore never to be powerless again. If I can control the smallest details, I can hold back the chaos. It doesn't bring them back, but it stops the world from taking anything else from me. Naomi's voice was quiet but steady. Control may stop chaos for a moment, but it can't heal you. It can't fill the empty space. His eyes locked onto hers, sharp as ever. But for the first time she saw the crack beneath, the man inside the armor. And what would you know of loss, Harris? Naomi's chest tightened, but she didn't look away. I know what it's like to sit in a hospital and count the cost of every treatment. I know what it's like to wonder if my mother will live long enough to see my brother graduate. And I know what it's like to smile at customers while fear is eating me alive inside. That's loss too, sir. Different but real. Silence fell, heavy but not hostile. Richard didn't respond right away. He lifted his glass, sipped, and set it down. You speak when most would stay silent, he said finally. That's why I asked for you. That's why you're still here. Naomi's heart pounded. She didn't know if it was a warning, a confession, or something else entirely. The meal that night was simple: grilled vegetables, roasted chicken, bread. He ate slowly, speaking little. Naomi stood nearby, her movements quiet, her thoughts loud. At the end of the evening he signed the bill as usual. But this time when she opened the folder, there was no money inside. Only a note, folded once. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The storm will always come. The question is, will you stand in it or be swept away? Naomi folded the note and tucked it into her apron. Later at home she placed it in the wooden box beside the others. The box was filling now, each slip of paper not just a message but a chain, binding her closer to him. She stared at it for a long time, her chest heavy with the truth she could no longer ignore. Richard Caldwell was no longer just her most demanding customer. He was a man pulling her into his storm, and with every Tuesday that passed, the line between survival and surrender grew thinner. By the time the 12th Tuesday came, Naomi no longer pretended that Richard Caldwell's dinners were ordinary service. They were something else entirely: rituals, tests, confessions delivered in fragments. Each week he pulled her deeper into his world, and each week she carried the weight home in silence. The staff had stopped hiding their whispers now. As Naomi tied her apron in the back room, two servers lowered their voices, not realizing she could hear. "She's in too deep," one muttered. "You don't spend that much time with him and come out clean." "She'll regret it," the other said. "No one stands close to Caldwell without paying a price." Naomi's hands trembled for a moment, but then she steadied them. They didn't know what it felt like to choose between silence and survival. They didn't know the cost of medicine or the weight of unpaid bills. She did. And so she kept walking forward. That evening the private dining floor was already set when she arrived. The room glowed dimly, candles flickering against the dark wood. Richard sat at the table as usual, but tonight something was different. He wasn't surrounded by papers or contracts. There was no wine, no meal waiting. Only a single envelope rested in front of him. "Harris," he said as she entered, his voice lower than usual. "Good evening, sir," she replied. "Sit." She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. He slid the envelope toward her. Naomi hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a newspaper article clipped from years ago, the accident. The one she had seen online, but here it was in physical print, the ink yellowed slightly with age. Her breath caught. Beneath the headline, "Drunk Driver Acquitted in Fatal Crash," was a photograph of Richard, younger, standing outside the courthouse, his face set in stone. His wife and daughter's names were printed beneath the article. Naomi's throat tightened. She looked up at him, but his eyes were on the table, his jaw rigid. "They called it justice," he said bitterly. "They called it mercy. What they meant was money. Influence. A system built to protect the guilty as long as their pockets are full." Naomi closed the envelope carefully, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Richard's gaze lifted, sharp again. "Don't be. Sorry doesn't change the world. Action does." Naomi steadied herself. "And what action do you expect from me, sir?" He leaned forward, his voice quieter but heavier. "I expect you to see. To never let their masks blind you. To survive with your dignity intact, no matter how many times the world tries to strip it from you." Naomi swallowed hard. "And what about you? Have you kept yours intact?" For a moment, silence pressed thick between them. Then, for the first time, Richard's eyes flickered. Not with anger, not with coldness, but with something close to defeat. "Some things can't be reclaimed," he said quietly. "All I can do now is make sure others don't lose theirs." The meal that night was almost symbolic: bread, cheese, black coffee. Nothing extravagant, nothing precise. Naomi served quietly, her mind churning. At the end of the evening, Richard signed the bill as usual. But when Naomi opened the folder after he left, there was no tip this time. Only another note, folded neatly. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "Dignity is not given. It is defended. Even in silence. Even in storms." Naomi pressed the paper flat, her chest heavy. She placed it carefully into her apron pocket, knowing exactly where it would go later, into the wooden box beside all the others. Back at her apartment, she sat in silence long after Darius had gone to bed, long after her mother had drifted into restless sleep. The notes were lined neatly in the box, the check still waiting, the envelope with the article resting on top. Naomi traced her fingers over the words, over the pieces of Richard Caldwell's storm that now lived inside her apartment. Each one was both a gift and a chain, binding her closer to a man who terrified and protected her in equal measure. And for the first time, Naomi admitted something she had tried to ignore for weeks. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing in the storm, and deciding whether she would walk out of it stronger or be consumed by it. By the 13th Tuesday, Naomi no longer needed Jennings to tell her where Richard Caldwell would be. The entire restaurant knew now. He no longer came for table 8, no longer tolerated the noise of the main dining hall. His world had shifted entirely upstairs, and Naomi was the only one allowed to cross its threshold. That night, as she walked toward the staircase, she felt the stares of her co-workers burning into her back. Some pitied her. Others envied her. Many feared for her. Naomi lifted her chin and kept walking. She had long since accepted that her survival meant stepping into storms others would run from. When she entered the private room, Richard was already there. But tonight he wasn't seated. He stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out over the glittering city below. The table was bare. No food, no wine, no papers. Just silence. "Harris," he said without turning. "Good evening, sir. Sit." She lowered herself into the chair across from him, waiting. For a long time he didn't move, didn't speak. Finally he turned, his gray eyes sharper than usual. "Do you know what loyalty is, Harris?" Naomi steadied her breath. "It's trust proven over time." Richard nodded slightly. "And betrayal?" "Breaking that trust," she answered softly. He walked to the table and leaned forward, his hands flat on the wood. "Everyone betrays eventually. Money changes them. Fear changes them. Desire changes them. No one stands forever." Naomi held his gaze. "Maybe. But some of us try." His eyes narrowed as though weighing her words. Then he sat, folding his hands neatly. "Tonight I'm giving you a choice." Her chest tightened. "A choice." Richard reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table between them. Naomi hesitated before pulling it closer and opening it. Inside were documents, bank slips, contracts, transfers. Her eyes widened as she realized what they represented. A trust fund set up in her name, her mother's treatment fully covered, her brother's tuition secured for years. She looked up, stunned. Why are you doing this? Richard's voice was flat, controlled. Because you've proven something no one else has. You don't flinch. You don't break. And when I test you, you stand. That makes you rare. Naomi's throat tightened. And in return? What do you expect? He leaned back, his expression unreadable. Loyalty. The word hung heavy in the air. Naomi's pulse quickened. You mean, you want me to work for you? Richard shook his head slowly. Work? No. Work is for those who can be dismissed. I don't dismiss you. I'm asking you to step into my world. Permanently. Her stomach twisted. She thought of her mother's fragile health, of Darius's dreams of graduating. She thought of the notes in her wooden box, the change she had been collecting Tuesday by Tuesday. I'm just a server, Naomi whispered. No, Richard said firmly. That's the mask you wear. Underneath you're something else. And I see it even if you don't. The silence between them was suffocating. Naomi's mind raced. To accept meant safety, her family's future secure, her burdens lifted. But it also meant surrender, stepping fully into his shadow. To refuse meant risking everything he had given her, everything he might take away. Finally she spoke. And if I say no? Richard's jaw tightened. His voice was calm but heavy. Then you walk away with what I've already given you. Untouched. But don't mistake that for freedom, Harris. The world won't protect you. And the storm will find you again. Naomi's hands shook as she folded the envelope closed. She stared at it for a long time, then looked up at him. I need time. He studied her face for several seconds, then gave a slow nod. 1 week. Next Tuesday you decide. Yes or no. No in between. The meal that night was minimal: soup, bread, black coffee. Neither spoke much. Naomi served quietly, her thoughts a storm louder than the thunder outside. When Richard left, Naomi collected the bill folder as always. Inside was a note written in his sharp, precise hand. Choice is an illusion, Harris. But sometimes it matters who gives it to you. Later that night, back in her apartment, Naomi placed the envelope in her wooden box, beside the notes and the check. Her hands lingered on the lid before closing it. Darius's laughter from the other room reminded her of what was at stake. Her mother's soft breathing from the bedroom reminded her of why she had endured every Tuesday. And yet, as she lay awake in the dark, one question circled endlessly in her mind. Was this a rescue, or a trap disguised as salvation? The 14th Tuesday arrived with a weight Naomi had never felt before. All week, the envelope Richard Caldwell had given her sat locked in her wooden box, its contents pressing on her mind like a stone. Every time she glanced at it, she thought of her mother's frail health, of Darius hunched over his textbooks, of rent notices folded on the counter. And every time she thought of Richard's voice. 1 week. Yes or no. No in between. At Le Chateau door, the staff watched her more openly now. Jennings pulled her aside before she climbed the stairs. His voice carried both worry and finality. Naomi, I don't know what you're walking into up there. But whatever decision you make sure it's yours, not his. She nodded faintly, then climbed the staircase, her heart heavy with the weight of choice. The private room was as she expected. Dim, quiet, a table set with precision. Richard sat at the head as always, but tonight there were no papers, no wine, no distractions. Only him. Harris, he greeted her. Good evening, sir. Sit. She obeyed. For a long time, silence stretched between them. The city glowed through the tall windows, rain streaking down the glass. Then Richard leaned forward, his voice sharp but calm. Your week is over. What is your answer? Naomi's chest tightened. She had rehearsed responses all week, but now, staring into his steel-gray eyes, every word seemed to dissolve. Finally, she spoke softly but firmly. You've given me more than I can repay. You've covered bills I could never dream of paying. You've fought for my family without asking for thanks. But Richard, I can't live in your shadow. I can't let my dignity become a debt. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His eyes stayed locked on hers, cold and unreadable. Naomi continued, her voice steady. I will take what you've already given. I'll use it for my mother, for my brother, for the life we deserve. But I won't belong to you. I can't. Because if I do, I'll lose the one thing you told me to hold on to, my dignity. The silence that followed was unbearable. She expected anger, a sharp rebuke, the storm of his control unleashed. Instead, Richard leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. Most people would have said yes. Most would have grabbed at security, even if it meant surrender. But not you. Naomi's breath caught. You remind me, Richard said, his voice lower now, of the woman my daughter might have become. Strong. Unyielding. Unafraid of storms. For the first time his eyes softened, not with weakness, but with something Naomi had never seen in him before, grief stripped bare. I won't ask again, he said finally. Your decision is made. Take what I've given. Protect your family. And remember this, storms don't end, Harris. But you've proven you can stand in them. Naomi felt her throat tighten, but she nodded. Thank you, sir. The meal that night was almost symbolic. Bread. Soup. Black coffee. They ate in silence, two people bound by something that wasn't friendship, wasn't servitude, something harder to name. At the end of the evening, Richard signed the bill as always. Naomi opened the folder once he left. Inside was a tip, generous as ever, but no note this time. Just silence. When she returned home, she opened her wooden box and placed the final slip of paper inside. The box was full now. Notes, checks, envelopes, each one a thread of a storm she had survived. Her mother's treatments would continue. Darius would finish his studies. The bills that once drowned her were now manageable. And through it all, Naomi had kept the one thing Richard had warned her never to lose. Her dignity. As she closed the box, Naomi whispered to herself a quiet vow. I stood in the storm. And I'm still standing. Outside, rain fell harder. But inside, Naomi felt a calm she hadn't known in years. Richard Caldwell would return to his rituals, his storms, his endless need for control. But Naomi Harris would no longer be just his server, his target, or his test. She was her own. And that, she realized, was the truest gift he had ever given her.